It was a warm evening in Rome, the kind where the cobblestones still radiate the heat of the day. Mark, an American tourist with a backpack full of guidebooks, sat at a small table outside a trattoria in Trastevere. He had just finished a plate of carbonara that was, quite frankly, life-changing. He felt relaxed, happy, and completely in tune with the Italian lifestyle, or so he thought. As the waiter cleared his plate, Mark leaned back in his chair, watching the Vespas buzz by like angry bees. He felt a natural craving creeping up, a desire for something warm and comforting to cap off the meal. In America, this would be the most normal thing in the world. He caught the waiter's eye, raised a hand slightly, and prepared to make a request that he assumed was innocent. He didn't know it yet, but he was about to commit a cultural felony that would change the entire atmosphere of his night. The waiter, a man in his 50s with an impeccably ironed white apron, approached the table with a polite smile. He asked if the gentleman would like anything else, perhaps a digestive or the bill. Mark smiled back, completely oblivious to the unwritten constitution of Italian dining he was about to violate. He cleared his throat and said, quite confidently, that he would love a cappuccino. The reaction was not what he expected. It wasn't a nod. It wasn't a scribble on a notepad. It was a freeze. The waiter's hand actually stopped moving in midair. The polite smile didn't exactly vanish, but it stiffened into something that looked a lot like pity, mixed with confusion. The ambient noise of the restaurant seemed to drop by several decibels, as if the very air in Rome was offended. Mark looked around, wondering if he had mispronounced the word, but the silence told him that the problem wasn't his accent. It was his timing. For a few agonizing seconds, nobody said a word. Mark shifted in his chair, his confidence beginning to crumble under the weight of the waiter's stare. Finally, the older man leaned in slightly, lowering his voice as if he were breaking bad news to a relative. He explained with a pained expression that a cappuccino contains milk. He said the word milk with a heaviness that suggested it was a controlled substance. He gestured to his own stomach, shaking his head slowly, indicating that putting hot milk on top of a heavy pasta dinner was a biological disaster waiting to happen. Mark blinked, trying to process this. In his mind, coffee was just coffee. But here, coffee was a ritual, a medicine, and a precise science. The waiter was looking at him not as a paying customer who is always right, but as a naive child who was about to hurt himself. Mark felt the heat rise in his cheeks. Mark attempted to salvage the situation, trying to explain that he just liked the taste. He gave a nervous laugh, shrugging his shoulders as if to say, "I'm American, we do crazy things." But the waiter did not laugh. He simply sighed, a long, weary exhalation that seemed to carry the weight of 2,000 years of culinary tradition. He looked at Mark's empty plate, then back at Mark, and asked if he was absolutely sure. It was a warning, not a question. It felt like he was being asked to sign a waiver before bungee jumping. Mark hesitated. He suddenly felt ridiculous for fighting so hard for a cup of frothy milk. But pride is a funny thing. He nodded, perhaps a bit too aggressively, and confirmed the order. The waiter stood up straight, his face devoid of emotion now, and scribbled the order down with a quick, sharp movement that felt like a judgment. As the waiter walked away, Mark realized that the theater of his humiliation wasn't limited to his table. A couple at the next table, elegant locals sipping wine, were openly staring. They weren't being rude, exactly, but they were definitely observing him like he was a specimen in a zoo. He could almost hear their thoughts and look at the tourist, destroying his digestion. Mark tried to look busy, checking his phone, but he felt exposed. It was a strange sensation, being an outsider not because of language or clothing, but because of a beverage choice. He realized how much of culture is invisible, hidden in the silent rules that everyone knows but nobody writes down. He had walked into a minefield he didn't even know existed. He wondered how many other rules he had broken that day without realizing it. The charm of the Roman evening had curdled, replaced by a sticky, awkward self-consciousness. The cappuccino arrived, but it was not delivered with a flourish. The waiter placed the cup on the table with a definitive clink, almost slamming it down. There was no "enjoy your coffee" or "here you go," just the cup sitting there like an accusation. It looked perfect. The foam was thick, the cocoa powder dusted artfully on top. But it felt like contraband. Mark reached for the handle, feeling the eyes of the waiter still on him from the doorway. He took a sip. It was delicious, creamy and rich, exactly what he had wanted. But as he swallowed, he felt a phantom heaviness in his stomach, a psychosomatic reaction to the waiter's warning. He wasn't just drinking coffee anymore, he was drinking rebellion. He was drinking his own stubbornness, The pleasure of the taste was fighting a losing battle against the crushing social pressure of the environment. He finished the drink quickly, mostly to get the evidence off the table. As the caffeine hit his system, his brain started to analyze the logic of the situation. Why was this such a big deal? He thought about the American approach to food, which is often about immediate gratification and excess. If you want a burger for breakfast, you get a burger. If you want milk at midnight, you drink milk. But here food wasn't just fuel or pleasure, it was a structure. The no cappuccino after 11 a.m. rule wasn't arbitrary. It was based on a deep-seated belief in digestion, in the idea that there is a right time and a wrong time for everything. By ordering it, he hadn't just broken a rule. He had disrespected the rhythm of the Italian day. He had tried to impose his chaos on their order. The check arrived and Mark paid quickly, leaving a slightly larger tip than necessary, perhaps as an apology for his culinary crimes. He stood up and walked out of the piazza, blending back into the stream of tourists and locals. The cool night air felt good on his face. He walked past other cafes, noticing the cups on the tables. Espresso, Amaro wine, not a single white cup of cappuccino in sight. It was a visual confirmation of his error. He realized that travel isn't just about seeing monuments or taking photos of the Colosseum. It is about bumping into these invisible walls. It is about the friction that happens when your habits grind against someone else's traditions. That friction is uncomfortable, yes, but it is also the only way you actually learn anything about the place you are visiting. He stopped at a bridge overlooking the Tiber River, leaning against the stone railing. He thought about the waiter again. The man wasn't trying to be mean. He was trying to protect the integrity of his culture. In a world that is becoming increasingly homogenized, where you can get the same latte in Seattle as you can in Seoul, these stubborn little rules are actually precious. They are the things that make Rome Rome. If the Italians gave up on their coffee rules, what would they give up next? Their long lunches? Their Sunday family gatherings? Mark realized that the strictness wasn't about exclusion, it was about preservation. By fighting him on the cappuccino, the waiter was actually doing his job as a guardian of his heritage. Mark felt a sudden, strange surge of respect for the grumpy man in the white apron. The next morning, Mark woke up early. The sun was just hitting the terracotta rooftops. He dressed and went down to the same neighborhood, finding a busy coffee bar filled with locals standing at the counter. It was chaos, but it was organized chaos. He walked up to the barista. It was 9:30 in the morning. This was the window. This was the safe zone. He cleared his throat, but this time there was no hesitation. He looked the barista in the eye and ordered a cappuccino. The man didn't blink, he didn't sigh. He just nodded, banged the portafilter, and steamed the milk. It was a transaction of pure acceptance. Mark took his cup, stood at the bar like the locals, and drank it. It tasted different than the one the night before. It tasted right. It tasted like he finally belonged in the scene. Travel changes you, but only if you let it break you a little bit first. You have to let go of the idea that your way is the only way. Mark finished his coffee and placed the cup on the saucer with a gentle clink. He walked out into the Roman sunlight, ready for the day. He knew that later, after lunch, he would switch to espresso. He would follow the rules, not because he had to, but because he wanted to feel the rhythm of the city. He had learned that the best souvenir wasn't something you bought in a shop. It was the lesson he learned in that uncomfortable silence at the trattoria. Sometimes the most respectful thing you can do is simply listen to the waiter, skip the milk, and drink the darkness. Because when you do, you finally taste the culture. If this made you think, it did its job. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.